I am trained as an archaeologist. I was at St John's College, Cambridge at the end of the 1950s, so I had a very orthodox training, specialising in the later prehistory of Europe. It wasn't really till I came to Glasgow University to be an assistant curator at the Hunterian Museum in 1960 that I really heard about Alexander Thom and his work. And that was introduced to me about 3 years later by Professor Archie Roy, who died recently, unfortunately, who had been surveying some stone circles on Arran and wanted me to assist with their publication to make sure he hadn't made any archaeological blunders and so on. And he told me about Professor Thom and his work. But it really wasn't until Thom's first book appeared in 1967 and the row that provoked in the archaeological profession that I became seriously interested in all this and eventually decided I ought to try and do something to persuade myself either that it was all nonsense or that there was something in it. The reason our Neolithic ancestors built stone circles and standing stones and henge monuments is of course much argued over by not only by archaeologists but by other interested people as well. My own view, taking into account what I now think about Thom's work, is that they were the edifices, the instruments, if you like, and the ceremonial centres of a priesthood, a Neolithic professional priesthood, who existed in the 3rd millennium and part of the 2nd millennium BC. This is not a popular view in archaeology, but I think most people would accept that they were ritual sites of some kind, and that so important that a gigantic effort was made by many communities to heave the stones up and into position and bring them to the site and so on. So whatever view you take about the exact function, the work involved seems to have been absolutely central to the societies of the time. The reason they arouse such strong feelings is not entirely clear to me. I think, judging from my own experience, when you see a standing stone on a bit of Scottish moorland, it does somehow seem to be speaking to you, or at least challenging you to explain it. Why did this monster block get dragged there and heaved up, rammed into its socket? Was it just random? Was it a signpost for a footpath or bridle path, or was there something more to it? They are very dramatic structures, the circles and the stones, and of course the slightly earlier chambered tombs and so on. Also perhaps the fact that there's not much else from that time which you can look at, except in Orkney, makes them seem that more important and requiring our understanding. I would go for the atmosphere, the lonely places, the dramatic stones. I think that really can't fail to have an effect on you. I'm not at all sure what the long-term motivation of these people was. If we take it as a reasonable idea, for example, that the standing stones usually marked some kind of calendar line or astronomical alignment, I would imagine that the only alternative they had to ramming in a wooden post was an upright stone. Whether they thought, well, this will be here for another 5,000 years, I think that's rather unlikely. But they knew that posts only had a life of 20 years or more, so they thought, at least if they thought in terms of a few generations of their colleagues, they would want to have something massive there. And they seem to have had the power and authority to recruit the labour to do it, which itself is very interesting.